He found her crying, and the galaxy began to burn. The ship's metal hull creaked softly as it adjusted its course, a reminder that even in the vast emptiness, life had a way of whispering itself into existence. Elias liked these quiet runs. He liked the solitude, the way space let a person think without interruption. Most of all, he liked the feeling of being a small but meaningful part of a bigger universe, where every action, no matter how small, could ripple far beyond sight. It was then that the signal arrived. The beacon was weak, almost imperceptible, but it carried something unusual. Most distress signals were automatic, dull, routine. They beeped out coordinates, ship ID numbers, and sometimes a brief plea for help. But this one carried emotion, subtle but unmistakable, hidden behind layers of static. Elias frowned, leaning closer to the console. "Now this is different," he murmured. His hand hovered over the controls, hesitant yet eager. "Someone out there doesn't want to just be saved. They want to be found." Elias had spent enough years in space to know that curiosity could be dangerous. But curiosity had also kept him alive more times than he could count. He engaged the ship's thrusters and adjusted course. The signal pulsed again, guiding him like a faint heartbeat across the void. Hours later, the source of the signal appeared on the scanner, a ship, ancient and broken, tumbling silently through the darkness. Its hull was scarred, ripped in places, and its lights flickered weakly. Elia's heart beat faster. He had seen many wrecks before, but there was something about this one that felt different. He docked carefully, following all safety protocols. The airlock hissed open, and Elias stepped into the ship. The smell hit him first, a mix of burnt circuits, old metal, and something softer, almost human, almost alive. He paused, eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. The place was silent, except for the quiet hum of the failing power systems. Then he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. At first he thought it might be the ship settling, but then it came again. A sob, faint but distinct. Someone was crying. Elias froze, listening. He had traveled through the stars for years, but he had never expected to hear a sound like this coming from a derelict alien vessel. He followed it, moving cautiously, until he reached a small room near the ship's center. There, kneeling among broken star charts and shattered data crystals, was a figure. She was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, pale blue under the weak lights. Her eyes were large, dark, and full of an emotion that humans called sorrow. Her hands trembled as she hugged herself, curling into a posture that spoke of loneliness and fear. Elias took a careful step forward, his voice soft. "Hey, are you okay?" The woman flinched, raising her hands defensively, but she didn't move away. She just looked at him, eyes wide, hesitant, searching. He realized then that she was not just afraid of him. She was afraid of everything, afraid of being found, afraid of being seen. I'm not hurt," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "But I cannot fix it." Elias knelt slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Fix what?" She shook her head. Tears ran down her cheeks, leaving faint streaks in the glow of the broken lights. "Everything, the records, the memories, the galaxy. I tried to protect it, but it is lost. I cannot stop it. I cannot." Her voice broke, and she sobbed again. Elias felt a pang in his chest. He didn't fully understand her words, but he understood her emotion. He had never been trained for moments like this, yet something inside him insisted that he could not just walk away. He extended a hand. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to do it alone. I can help. Let me help." The woman froze. For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she reached out. Their hands met, and Elias felt a strange warmth spread through him, as if the simple touch carried a weight far heavier than either of them could measure. It was then that the lights in the room flickered violently. The ship shuddered and a low hum began to fill the air. Elias glanced at the walls, at the consoles, at the broken machinery. Something was waking up, something old, something powerful. The woman looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't understand, you should." But it was too late. He didn't know it yet, but by touching her hand, by showing her simple human compassion, Elias had triggered a chain reaction. Ancient systems, long dormant, began to stir. Star charts flickered back to life. Holographic displays lit up with data from across the galaxy, showing histories, conflicts, treaties, and secrets long buried. And deep in the silence between the stars, something responded. Elias stood, his mind racing. "What did I do?" he asked. The woman's name was Salith. She was an archivist, part of a species that had once wielded influence across the galaxy, not through armies, not through fleets, but through knowledge and emotion. They could calm warlords, sway populations, and guide civilizations, all with a touch of empathy, a word spoken at the right moment. But her people had been controlled, suppressed by a council that feared their power. The Conquered, as they called it, had imposed strict rules. No archivist could feel freely, no one could interact emotionally with them, and anyone who tried would be labeled a threat. Her crying was not just sadness, it was rebellion. It was the first real emotion she had allowed herself in centuries. Elias didn't understand all of this, but he felt it. He felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders, the loneliness of a species denied its own humanity. And he knew that whatever he did next, he could not turn away. "Tell me what you need," he said quietly. "Tell me how I can help." Salith looked at him, her large eyes reflecting both hope and fear. "If I am touched, if I am comforted, if I am not left alone, the galaxy will notice. The systems, the histories, the records, they will awaken, and some will not be pleased." Elias swallowed hard. "And if we do nothing," her hands shook as she raised them. "If we do nothing, the galaxy will remain blind, but it will also remain safe. Sometimes safety is silence." Elias thought about the countless ships he had passed by in his travels, the colonies struggling quietly on the edge of known space, the people who had never seen anyone care enough to reach out. Silence had not been safety, it had been apathy. He could not accept it. "I don't care if they're angry," he said firmly. "Someone had to care, and I care. That's enough for now." Salith hesitated, then nodded. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried meaning. By allowing him to help, she had begun to trust again, and trust, he knew, was the first step toward change. The ship shuddered again, louder this time. Lights flickered across the walls, casting strange shadows that made the room feel alive. Elias felt the hum in his chest, a vibration that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. Something ancient was stirring, something that had slept for centuries, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to care. "We need to move," Salith said, her voice steadier now but still tinged with fear. "The Conquered will notice. They always notice. They cannot allow this." Elias nodded. "Then we move, but not because we're afraid, because we have to." Together, they navigated the labyrinth of the broken ship, avoiding failing machinery and weak gravity zones. Elias marveled at the technology, at the way the ship seemed alive, not in the sense of sentience, but as if it remembered everything that had ever happened on board. And he realized that Salith was like the ship, fragile yet resilient, burdened yet unyielding. When they finally reached the airlock that would take them back to Elia's ship, Salith paused. She looked at him with something close to gratitude, but also warning. "You do not know what you have done," she said. "By helping me, by showing me compassion, you have changed things. Some stars will burn because of this. Some civilizations will wake, and some will wish you had never existed." Elias met her gaze, his expression calm. "Then we make sure the ones who wake are ready. We make sure they choose wisely." She nodded slowly. And together they stepped into the small shuttle, leaving the ancient ship behind. As the shuttle detached and glided toward the waiting Orcs salvage vessel, Elias felt a sense of anticipation he had never known. This was not just a rescue mission. This was the start of something far bigger, something that could ripple across the galaxy, something dangerous. something beautiful. And somewhere in the distance, stars began to pulse faintly, like the first breath of a world waking from a long sleep. The shuttle cut through the void, the hum of its engines echoing softly in the small cabin. Elias sat across from Salith, studying her as she traced her fingers over a small data crystal she had rescued from the wreck. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, careful, as if she feared even the air around her could betray a secret. "You're quiet," Elias said finally. "Thinking about what's coming." Salith's eyes flicked up, large and dark, filled with something he could not name. "I am thinking about what has already come," she replied softly, "and how quickly it may end. The conquered does not forgive easily. And I am the spark of what they sought to extinguish." Elias nodded. He had heard rumors of the conquered, stories whispered in spaceports and at the edges of human colonies. They were not a single government or fleet, but a web of control spanning star systems, older than any human civilization. They prided themselves on order, on obedience, on silence. They feared the archivists because knowledge combined with emotion could undo the rules they had written for centuries. "I don't care about their rules," Elias said firmly. "Rules are only as strong as those who obey them, and I'm not obeying." Salith blinked at him, a faint smile brushing her lips. "You are unlike them," she murmured. "Your species, you act without fear of consequence, as if the outcome is not what matters most. It is human, reckless, brave, terrible." Elias shrugged. "I call it stubbornness." For a long while they sat in silence, the shuttle gliding past dead worlds and drifting debris. Then Salith spoke again, softer this time. "You must understand what you have done. By touching me, by offering comfort, you activated what my people call the resonance. It is a wave of emotional energy, a memory of our collective history. It can heal or destroy. It is dangerous." Elias frowned. "Dangerous how?" "Some will see it as a threat," she explained. "Others may see it as hope, but the conquered will see it as an act of defiance. You have made enemies beyond anything you can imagine." He leaned back in his seat, letting her words sink in. He had dealt with pirates, rogue AI, and the occasional bureaucratic official, but this was a threat that spanned light years and centuries. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt alive. The galaxy was no longer quiet. Something had shifted. "Then we prepare," he said simply. "We figure out how to survive, how to warn people, and how to make sure your story, our story, doesn't die." Salith's fingers stilled on the data crystal. "You speak as if survival is a choice," she said. "But when the conquered moves, survival is never guaranteed." Elias smiled faintly. "Then we make it guaranteed, somehow." The shuttle emerged from the empty stretch of space into a sector teeming with life. Human colonies dotted the stars, along with alien settlements Elias had only heard of in stories. Each system seemed calm, unaware of the awakening that had begun far beyond their vision. Salith studied the charts, her fingers tracing constellations and old trade routes. "We should not stop here," she said. "If the conquered learns that I am free, that the resonance has returned, they will hunt us. They will try to silence me again." Elias nodded. "Then we don't stop, but we can't outrun them forever. We need allies, people who will stand with us when the time comes." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Humans, you are strange creatures, so full of emotion, yet capable of so much reason. You will either be our greatest asset or our greatest danger." Elias laughed quietly. "Guess we'll find out together." As they approached the nearest human colony, Elias contacted the local station. "This is Work Salvage." "I have a situation," he said, keeping his tone casual though his heart raced. "We need assistance, medical, technical, and diplomatic." The response was cautious, measured. "Work Salvage, this is Station Kethar. Can you clarify your situation?" Elias hesitated. How much could he reveal without sounding insane? "I've found someone," he said carefully. "An alien, she's important and she needs protection. I believe the conquered may be aware of her presence soon." There was a pause, Then the voice responded, calm but firm. Understood. Dock at Bay 12. Do not make contact with any outside parties until instructions are given. Elias nodded, signaling Salith to prepare for landing. As the shuttle descended into the colony, he noticed people watching from the observation decks. Some were curious, some cautious. Humans had seen strange things before, but nothing like this. Inside the station, they were led to a secure chamber. Salith looked around, eyes scanning every detail. This place, it is safe but temporary. We cannot stay long. Elias agreed. We'll gather what we need and leave before anyone notices more than necessary. Over the next several hours, Elias and Salith worked together to access the data crystals she had brought from her ship. She explained fragments of her people's history, how the Aelith had once guided civilizations, how the conquered had imposed rules to suppress them, how the resonance had been hidden away for centuries. Each story added weight to their mission, and each revelation made Elias realize just how fragile the galaxy's balance had been. But even as they worked, disturbances began to appear. Communications channels flickered with static. Sensors picked up anomalies near the colony's perimeter. Salith's eyes widened as she felt a subtle vibration in the air, a pulse she recognized as the Conquered's awareness. "They are coming," she said quietly. "Not yet, but soon. They will not allow me to remain free." Elias clenched his jaw. "Then we have to move faster. Every second we wait gives them a chance to close in." He reached out to the colony's network, trying to send warnings to nearby systems, to prepare those who might aid them. He knew the Conquered's reach was vast, but he also knew that humans had a way of fighting back in ways that no bureaucracy could predict. Persistence, adaptability, and compassion, qualities that often turn the tide in impossible situations. As night fell over the colony's main city, a small crowd gathered near the observation windows, unaware of the true danger. Elias and Salith worked silently, focused on accessing the oldest archives, fragments of knowledge that could help them understand the Conquered's methods. Then the first sign of alarm. A communication relay flickered to life, sending a warning signal not to the colony but across multiple sectors. A coded alert, one that only certain fleets and officials could decipher. The Conquered had noticed the resonance. Salith froze. "They know it has begun." Elias put a hand on her shoulder. "Then we act together." They moved quickly, packing the essential crystals, activating a small ship waiting in a hidden dock. As they prepared to leave, the colony's systems began to register unusual activity. Small ships taking flight, sensors reporting anomalies in navigation arrays, messages traveling faster than normal channels. The galaxy was waking, and some of its inhabitants were beginning to notice. As the shuttle lifted off, Elias glanced back at the colony. It seemed calm, ordinary, but he knew that peace was a fragile illusion. Across the stars, the Conquered would be mobilizing. Across the galaxy, other species would feel the pulse of the resonance, some with hope, some with fear. Salith looked at him, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Your species, you do not realize what you have begun," she said. "The galaxy will change because of this. Some systems will burn, some civilizations will rise, and humans, you will be in the center of it all." Elias smiled faintly. "Then we better make sure it's worth it." The shuttle moved faster, slipping past patrol routes and jumping into uncharted sectors. For the first time, Elias felt the true weight of responsibility, not as a salvage engineer, not as a rescuer, but as someone who had awakened a power that could alter the course of the galaxy. In the quiet moments between jumps, he and Salith spoke of strategy, of what allies they might find, and of the challenges ahead. Salith revealed glimpses of her people's archives, knowledge of hidden planets, secret councils, and technologies long forgotten. Elias realized that even though they were small in number, they held a key to reshaping the galaxy's balance. And somewhere in the distance, stars pulsed faintly, echoing the awakening that had begun with a simple act of compassion. The conquered was coming. Other civilizations were stirring, and Elias knew that once the galaxy felt the resonance, there would be no turning back. For the first time in his life, he welcomed the storm. The galaxy was waking, and the signs were impossible to ignore. Across distant star systems, small anomalies appeared, ships reporting strange signals, planets receiving messages from long-dead archives, and fleets noticing patterns they had never seen before. The resonance, that subtle wave of emotion and memory Salith carried, was spreading, touching minds and systems in ways no one could control. Elias sat in the shuttle, watching the stars rush past. He had begun to understand that what he and Salith had started was bigger than any mission he had ever undertaken. It was no longer about rescue or survival. It was about influence, raw, unpredictable influence, and the conquered would not allow it to continue. Salith, seated beside him, traced her fingers over the data crystal that contained fragments of her people's archives. "The conquered will strike soon," she said quietly. "They cannot allow a single archivist to regain freedom. They will see it as a threat to all order in the galaxy. They will come with fleets, they will come with spies, and some will come in silence, invisible until it is too late." Elias leaned back. "Then we fight smart. We don't wait for them to find us. We move first. We warn the systems. We prepare people." She shook her head slightly. "Preparation alone will not suffice. They have rules that govern every major civilization. They have agents in every sector, and most leaders follow them blindly. To awaken the galaxy fully, we need more than preparation. We need to inspire. We need to show others why they should act." Elias considered her words. Inspiration. That was what humans did best, often without realizing it. Stories of courage, defiance, or simple compassion could ripple farther than fleets or weapons. That was the one advantage humans had, the ability to affect minds and hearts, not just systems and machines. "We start with the colonies," Elias said, "the ones that will listen. Small fleets, independent worlds, people who care enough to act. We show them the truth and they spread it further, one spark at a time." Salith nodded. "It is dangerous, but it may be the only way. If we wait for the conquered to act, then the galaxy will remain blind for decades, perhaps centuries. You have already begun the spark. We must fan it or it will die." They traveled for weeks through uncharted sectors, moving carefully, always watching for the subtle signs that the conquered might be tracking them. Elias had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their journey, the quiet hum of the shuttle, the data crystals glowing softly beside them, and the occasional burst of emotion that pulsed from Salith when she connected with a new archive. Each new piece of knowledge, each new memory from her people, strengthened the resonance, and the galaxy, in its own way, began to respond. The first system to truly feel it was a small human colony orbiting a blue-green planet known as Korath Prime. The residents were cautious but curious when they received the encrypted signal from Elias. He and Salith appeared at the station, introducing themselves not as saviors, but as messengers. They spoke simply, clearly, explaining the awakening that had begun and the dangers of the conquered's control. Many dismissed them at first, calling them dreamers or frauds. But others listened, engineers, pilots, scholars, and even local leaders who had grown tired of bureaucracy and silence. They were inspired not by fear, but by Elias' courage and Salith's sincerity. In just a few days, small ships began leaving Korath Prime, carrying messages and warning signals to neighboring colonies. Each ship that left multiplied the spark. Systems once isolated began to communicate, sharing knowledge, stories, and warnings. The resonance was spreading faster than Elias had imagined, a wave of awakening that moved not through fleets, but through hearts. Meanwhile, the conquered had noticed. Across sectors, agents reported disturbances, systems waking from long periods of obedience, fleets behaving unpredictably, archives being accessed without authorization. The Concord's leaders convened in secrecy, their faces grim. "They have found her," one of the counselors said, voice sharp. "The resonance is spreading. It is destabilizing entire sectors, and human involvement unexpected, uncontrolled." Another counselor, older and more cautious, replied, "Then we must act swiftly. Do not underestimate them. Humans are reckless, unpredictable, and immune to our usual methods. They do not fear consequences the way other species do. They are dangerous." Elias and Salith, unaware of the council's deliberations, continued their mission. They traveled to another system, this one inhabited by a mixture of alien species who had long lived under Concord regulation. Elias explained their situation plainly, using stories and examples to show the benefits of freedom and knowledge. Salith demonstrated the power of the resonance, allowing the inhabitants to feel the depth of her people's history and wisdom. Some were afraid, some curious, and some inspired beyond measure. Small groups formed, networks of individuals willing to act and to spread the awakening further. Every act of trust, every gesture of compassion, every decision to help rather than ignore strengthened the resonance and spread hope across the stars. But the Conquered did not wait. A fleet appeared suddenly near the outskirts of one system, sleek and disciplined. Its appearance alone caused panic, and agents within nearby systems moved to restrict communication, hoping to isolate the colonies Elias and Salith had influenced. Yet even as they acted, the spark could not be contained. Word had spread too far. Citizens, pilots, and engineers refused to follow orders blindly. Some fleets refused to fire upon their neighbors. Others chose to leave conquered fleets without guidance. Elias watched as chaos began to ripple through the ranks of the conquered. "This is what I hoped for," he said. "Not a fight, not destruction, but awareness. People making choices for themselves." Salith studied the approaching fleet, tension in her posture. "It will escalate. The conquered will not accept defiance for long. They will respond with power, with force. And humans, you will be central to their attention. They will target you." Elias smiled faintly. "Then we make sure we are ready, not just to survive but to show them what humans can do." The first confrontation came not with weapons, but with communication. Elias and Salith managed to send a message directly to the fleet's captain, bypassing conquered channels. They spoke honestly, explaining the awakening, the value of freedom, and the potential for a galaxy that could thrive without fear. It was an unusual tactic, one that defied standard protocol. The response was unexpected. A portion of the fleet hesitated. Orders were questioned. Some officers turned away from their superiors, deciding to investigate the truth rather than blindly obey. Elias realized that humans did not need fleets of weapons to inspire change. They needed courage, clarity, and honesty. Over the next days, systems began openly rejecting conquered control. Pilots refused to fire on neighbors, stations refused to cut off communication, and entire populations demanded autonomy. The conquered, which had ruled for centuries through fear and bureaucracy, found its influence slipping. Elias and Salith became symbols, not because they were warriors or rulers, but because they had shown empathy and courage. Humans had proven, once again, that their strength lay in choices, in bonds, and in the willingness to act when others would remain silent. Yet, the danger was real. Small attacks began, sabotage attempts and covert operations designed to slow their progress. Elias and Salith had to remain vigilant, constantly moving between systems, constantly inspiring, constantly reminding those they met that action mattered more than fear. Through it all, Elias noticed a strange pattern. The more systems awakened, the stronger the resonance grew. Salith's people's memories and knowledge flowed outward, touching more civilizations. Where fear had ruled, curiosity and hope began to take root. Entire sectors that had been stagnant for decades were now active, communicating, learning and making choices independently. One evening, as they traveled between two distant systems, Salith looked at Elias with a mix of exhaustion and wonder. "The galaxy is alive," she said quietly. "Not as it was, not under the Conquered, but alive in ways I did not think possible. You have changed everything." Elias glanced at her, a faint smile on his face. "We've only just started. Wait until more systems wake. Wait until more people realize they can choose. The Conquered can try to stop us, but they cannot stop what humans inspire. Not completely." She nodded, but there was concern in her eyes. "And yet, some will burn, some will resist, some will see freedom as a threat." Elias' expression grew serious. "Then we prepare for that too. The spark is out. We make sure it spreads wisely. We guide, we protect, we inspire." That is what humans do. Across the galaxy, the first waves of rebellion, curiosity, and independent thought spread faster than anyone had predicted. Systems that had followed the Conquered without question began to question, to resist, to choose. Fleets refused orders, colonies demanded autonomy, and the whispers of the resonance reached even the most remote corners. The Conquered was losing control, and humanity, through Elias and their willingness to act with empathy, had become the catalyst. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was awake. And as Elias and Salith prepared for the next system, for the next challenge, they knew one thing with certainty: the real test was just beginning. The galaxy was burning, not with fire, not with weapons, but with awakening, and humans stood at the center of it all. The Conquered came like a storm everyone had felt on the edge of their bones. It did not roar with thunder and missiles at first. It came with procedure, with cold announcements and the slow, precise movements of a machine certain of its math. Fleets slipped into position at the borders of systems that had woken. Communications channels filled with careful orders and threats written in formal language. The Conquered made its voice heavy and final, the voice that had told so many worlds what peace meant for centuries. Elias watched the screen and felt the old, familiar knot in his stomach. He had been a salvage engineer for most of his life, not a leader. He had not asked for this role. The galaxy had given it to him anyway. Salith sat beside him, quiet and steady, holding a small data crystal in both hands as if it were a living thing. Her eyes were bright, but not with fear. They held something else: resolve, memory, and a deep, careful hope. "They will not strike without reason," Salith said. "They will look for a cause, something to justify their actions. They will try to make people fear the resonance." Her voice was soft, like the rustle of leaves in a place where no wind blew anymore. Elias took a breath. "Then we give them no reason that truly matters. We answer with truth." With people. He could feel the strain stretching across the systems they had touched. He could feel old loyalties bending and breaking like thin ice. The first wave of confrontation came in small, painful ways. Station governors received orders to cut communications. Patrol captains were urged to enforce no-contact zones. A list of names, those who had aided Elias and Salith, appeared in official bulletins. Some of those names were pets of bureaucrats, some were pilots and scholars. The Conquered wanted to isolate the spark before it caught flame. Instead, the spark leapt. Messages flooded through hidden channels, through old relay loops and pirate nets, through the voices of people who had once been told silence was safety. Pilots refused orders in the name of conscience. Engineers on Conquered-adjacent stations opened their doors, letting in archives that had been sealed for generations. Small colonies declared themselves independent, citing nothing more complicated than the right to hear and to care. Conquered ships arrived at the edge of Koreth Prime's system and waited like dark fruit on a vine. Their captains were disciplined. They obeyed orders as if obedience were a kind of religion. But they were also captains who had daughters and sons, parents and friends. Salith reached out with the resonance in the quiet moments between tactical assessments and diplomatic cables. She touched the memories she carried, and let them flow through the nets the conquered did not suspect. Images rose in the minds of officers, lullabies sung by long-gone mothers, the first leap of a child in zero-G, the taste of a harvest on a distant world. The memories were not commands. They were reminders. They were small, sharp things that made an officer remember what it meant to be more than a rank. One captain, an officer named Joran, felt his hands tremble while he read the reports. He had ordered a blockade once upon a time and watched a small convoy burn in the cold. The conquered had praised his efficiency. The memory Salith sent did not make him guilty. It made him lonely. He stepped away from his console and looked out at the stars. For a moment, the distance between order and empathy narrowed. On many ships, officers questioned their orders. On some, they refused them outright. Small fleets that had once been instruments of compliance cut their engines and disengaged. The conquered responded with more procedure: hearings, delegations, legal inquiries. It believed bureaucracy could fix the world. It had not anticipated the stubbornness of human hearts and the sudden rise of shared feeling across species. Elias traveled system to system, not with an armada but with people. He moved with pilots who would not obey senseless orders, mechanics who could coax old engines into life, and medics who repaired more than metal. He found beauty in small acts. In one port, a dozen miners who had never known Salith's people gathered to shield a library from conquered inspection. They stood with their backs to the heavy doors, hands linked. Their faces were ordinary. Their determination was extraordinary. "You are asking a lot of us," one miner said quietly to Elias. "Our families are small. If the conquered wakes, they will come for us first." Elias looked at the man's hands, thick with work. He remembered his own small world, his ship with its dented hull, the nights he had spent repairing a broken engine while someone played a harmonica in the next bay. He had never meant to start a war. He had only wanted to answer a crying person. "We are asking you to do what you already do when it matters," he said. "We are asking you to choose. That is all any of us ever ask." These choices multiplied. Petitions to the conquered were ignored. The conquered offered tribunals that promised fairness only until they were alone behind a formal curtain. So the people built other ways. They held assemblies in the open, under the cold suns, and inside the warm halls of stations. Aliens of many shapes and voices came forward and told what they had felt when Salith's memories touched them. They spoke about being allowed to be sad, to remember loss without shame, to feel love without the vibration of law around it. Each voice was a small blow to the conquered's great, tidy argument that silence kept order. At the capital of the conquered, there was panic that no one admitted. The counselors who had written the rules watched the breakdown of their neat systems with mouths that did not know what to say. They convened emergency sessions and sent delegations. They attempted to arrest Salith through intermediaries, to brand her as a danger by law. Legal language moved like molasses. The galaxy had no taste for molasses now. People wanted living air. When the first attempt at force came, it failed in the simplest way. A conquered fleet moved to take a station by shutting off its power and broadcasting commands. The plan was to force compliance with darkness and silence, but the station's engineers had already rerouted power, lit emergency circuits, and opened every port. Citizens poured out into the streets. They climbed onto old maintenance cranes and onto the roofs of buildings and sang. Not in one voice, but in many, a chorus of languages, of rhythms and tones. Salith had taught them a song through memory, a lullaby from an archive that meant, "We will not be alone." It spread through the crowd like warmth. Conquered pilots hovered over the planet, weapons ready, and listened. Their comms crackled with orders, but then an odd thing happened. Pilots began to open small panels on their ships and let children's drawings fly into space. Paper, holographic, painted, 1,000 small things floated up and out past the blockade. They were not threats. They were proof that people could hold more than rules in their hands. Not all actions were peaceful. The conquered did not give up easily. It attempted to cripple networks and erase archives that had risen in the wake of the resonance. Some skirmishes occurred in the shadowed belts of unclaimed space where no law had ever been clear. Elias took no pleasure in those moments. He used his skills to shield people, to reroute data, to ferry civilians out of danger. He watched friends nurse wounds and watched technicians salvage what they could. But even when confrontation touched metal and engines, he felt the difference between a war fought for conquest and a defense fought for people. The latter had a different light. Salith did not fight with weapons. She fought with presence and memory. She walked through stations and fleets and let the resonance move like a tide. Where she went, tears came easily. Not tears of sorrow alone, but of recognition. Old rivals met and wondered why they had been kept apart. An officer who had sat in silence for 50 years found his voice to apologize to a mechanic he had once punished. Salith did not command these changes. She only returned what people had lost by degrees. Those acts mattered more than any ship registration. They unknotted the fine threads the conquered relied on, the belief that the galaxy should be organized by a single definition of peace. People began to speak with each other in ways the conquered had outlawed. They wrote new agreements for trade, for mutual aid, for shared archives. It was messy. It was loud. It was alive. At last, the conquered called a meeting of the major systems. It summoned leaders to the old assembly hall on a neutral moon. The hall had been designed to make any listener feel small and any speaker feel large. The conquered expected its presence to intimidate. Instead, representatives came bearing not edicts but stories. They told how their children had learned to ask questions. They showed the rebuilt archives and the backups hidden in asteroid caches. They showed footage of medics saving lives without asking permission. One of the counselors stood up, stiff in polished robes, and began to lecture on order and stability. The audience listened, and then an engineer from a tiny system stood and spoke up. She had hands like the miners and a voice that did not tremble. "We learned to hear again," she said simply. "We learned that silence saved the conquered and cost us everything else. We will not return to that." Elias and Salith were called forward. Salith spoke first, and her voice did not carry threat. It carried the echo of memory. She told the assembly how the archivists had once helped worlds heal from grief and break cycles of hatred. Elias told how he had found her crying, how he had taken her hand without asking for permission or for a crown. His words were plain. They did not ask for power. They asked for a choice. The counselors argued. The old logic of the conquered sought to regain its hold through laws and the tightness of control. But the voice of so many people had changed the room. Hundreds of delegates and the people behind them would not accept a return to silence. In the end, the conquered did not fall with a final blow. It unraveled in committees and resignations and in the slow work of translation. Some counselors tried to harden the rules, demanding punishments. Others resigned or were quietly removed. New systems formed committees where voices were appointed by local vote, not by an inherited decree. Agreements were drawn that included a clause nobody had thought important until then. No species could be governed in ways that took away their ability to feel and to remember. The wording was clumsy at first, but it was born of many small people saying no to silence. Salith's people were given a place in the new assembly. They were not given back the power they had once used to rule quietly. Instead, they were offered a role as guardians of memory, with the right to feel and the right to teach. Salith stood before the new council and accepted the decision not as victory, but as a hard-won trust. Elias watched her, and he felt his chest swell in a way that was not fear. The galaxy did burn, but not in the terrible way some had feared. Old lies burned away. Old quiet burned into light. In the aftermath, people rebuilt things differently. Libraries became places where anyone could come and ask a difficult question without being told to be silent. Fleets were reclassified as rescue and research first, and enforcement last. Trade agreements now included clauses about cultural exchange. People began to design technology with consent in mind. Weapons did not vanish, but their purpose was debated openly. Elias was offered many honors, nominations, and titles. He declined most of them. He did not want to be a leader with a chair and a crest. He wanted to be a man who could fix a broken hull and who would still answer a distress signal. He accepted one small position only, an honorary member of a council that would make sure archives were safe and accessible. Salith joked that this was the closest she would get to naming him an archivist. When the new assembly convened on a neutral world to sign the first shared agreement, Salith stood beside Elias. She had been crying that morning, but the tears were quiet and steady. Many people had cried over the months, some from sorrow, some from the relief of being heard. People walked into the hall with scars and with laughter. A small child climbed onto Elias' boot and refused to be put down. Elias laughed and let the child hold his hand, the same hand that had reached for Salith months ago in a broken ship. He thought back to that first moment, how simple it had been, and he did not regret it. The galaxy had changed because someone had decided not to look away. Salith stepped forward and spoke a few words into the assembly, not to claim power but to promise care. Elias spoke after her, simple and clear, telling the delegates that freedom was not an instruction manual but a daily practice. When the signatures were done, when the hall emptied into the evening air, Salith and Elias walked out together. The stars were bright, more so than they had been when Elias had first answered the signal. Around them, people shouted and sang and built and argued and played. It looked messy and beautiful. A journalist asked Elias later what he would tell his grandchildren if they ever asked him why he had done what he did. He thought for a long time and then said, "I would tell them that someone was crying." And someone, maybe not a hero, maybe just a tired man with a ship, went to see why, and it turned out the galaxy needed someone to answer a cry. Salith laughed, the sound catching in the light like a small bell. She looked at Elias and at the stars and then said, "You taught us that to be human is not a species thing. It is a way to be in the world." She paused, then added, "And you taught us to choose." They stood there for a while. The night was full of distant engines and the clatter of new lives. The galaxy had been set alight, not by hatred or conquest, but by the slow, stubborn flame of people deciding to care for one another. Elias put his hand on Salith's and felt the warmth, the same strange warmth he had felt the first time he reached for her. He had no idea what the future would bring. He only knew that when someone cried, he would go. And the galaxy, after all it had burned through, had learned to answer back. He found her crying, and the galaxy began to burn.